want to put the caveat there, we're not talking about using these technologies to replace either the current very positive experience that candidates have when they're speaking face-to-face with somebody, but rather to look at ways of widening access to testing and to education. And I think that it's the ability of these technologies to complement what we currently do, but also to create much greater efficiencies, which is something that we will find. Just a few thoughts.
Okay. I think that in 2030, language testing will become very much closer and closer to or tied to technology. But there are drawbacks also to that. If you could develop programs or some engines where the student could take the test personally from home or from that will be great. But there is always a challenge of security of the test and whether the score that the student will get from the test is honest and represents his or her accurate proficiency in the test. We have in the NCA, National Center for Assessment, over 100 kinds of tests now. And, language tests, stand out to represent the most difficult ones to make. They are not easy because it is not just creating adaptive testing or multi-stage testing or testing, delivered by a mode of technology. The issue involves more than that. It involves also representation of the contents. How can you develop a test where you guarantee that all the skills are measured? So yes, the testing and technology will become closer, but they have to consider also all the drawbacks that may come out of that.
So I want to answer this from 2 points of view. The first one is the test administration, and the second one from the test scoring. So from the test administration, I would see like hats off with the organization that I'm working now, yeah. So from the test administration, I could see that now with the internet-based test or whatever computer-based test that we have already got, probably more and more within 10 years, the test administration will be a lot more handy and users-friendly. We don't know, maybe we can do the test with our phone in the next 10, 15 years, and I believe that's going to be something, up to date. And for the test scoring, I could see with the development of neural language processing and how actually, let's say, take one example of speech recognition and how the technology within this field of research, then I could see also the scoring of productive skills such as speaking and writing will also be like involved, like innovated. That's how I see it.
Okay. Well, I can't predict the future, but I think, can you hear me? Yeah. I think that obviously exams will be on computers in the future, and I also know that's something that you guys are starting to do now, and I believe there are some concerns because the students don't always type, and they don't always type on their main courses as well. So I would say if there's an implementation of technology, make sure the exam follows those main courses and doesn't lead it. Because if those students never type, and they're not going to, then I think you're creating a lot of construct irrelevant variants that you probably don't need in your test. So I would do that later. In terms of kind of large-scale examining, what I would like to see in 2030 is probably a more modular approach, which again is context-driven, so it's more meaning for those students. So I don't know. send that back.
Tom, I'm going to do the opposite of what you asked. I'm going to look back instead of looking ahead in 10 years from now. I'm going to look back 10 years ago. And if you asked me this question 10 years ago about where we are now, it would seem like science fiction scenario to me, you know, where we are now at this point in time. So thinking back 10 years ago, if you had asked me this question, I could never imagine that we have got to this stage now where we are able to talk about using adaptive assessment in our education. So as a publisher, the more time goes by, the more we realize the practical value of adaptive assessment, the more, as you can imagine, we invest in it. And we have started with other higher education subjects. Now we have started, as you can imagine, making use of it for English as well.
Thank you, Nikos. Do you want to add something?
Just to add one more thought I've just had, which is I think there is also, it will be interesting to see what happens with the emerging trend of games-based assessment, which is already impacting in the corporate world in terms of the use of games-based assessments as a way of screening potential employees. And I have heard about innovations where games-based assessment is being used in higher education as well, as a kind of learner-centered approach to you know, their own personal development. And I think as a sort of truly immersive experience, so I mean games-based assessment as an immersive experience rather than just adding gaming to something, I think that will be quite interesting to see how that evolves as well.
Yeah, fascinating. And it's funny saying you've gone to looking back. I wrote an article for a testing journal 10 years ago saying that within the next 5 years, touchscreen technology on the phones we have in our pocket will revolutionize testing, and all testing will be done on mobile phones, and that was by 2016. So shows how dodgy predicting the future is. Okay, another question for you. Why don't learners like being tested, and is that our fault?
I think it's because they don't know what the test means for them and their learning. And I definitely and feel passionately that they need to be connected. Those need to be tasks, they know what they're doing. I mean, IELTS is a perfect example. When I studied testing, before I was a teacher, and I was quite angry with the IELTS exam because I thought, actually, it was kind of meaningless, and it didn't test what I thought it should test. It was a test of academic English, but it was very vague. And I then decided to research it and write an essay on it. And I learned about all these underpinnings behind the exam, which actually funneled all these essential skills that they were going to be done, that they were going to do at university. But the thing is, as a teacher, I didn't know that. And actually, in a lot of classrooms, the teachers aren't aware of that. The teachers aren't aware of that. So therefore, the students aren't going to be aware of it at all. And I think that link, you know, what you're doing in the exam has relevance for your future. And here it is. And here is how it's linked to the learning. I think this is really key to give students some kind of understanding of what they're doing in tests and make them slightly more enjoyable.
Thank you. Abdulrahman.
Okay, I think the students don't like tests because it is just like, you know, a drawer, or you ask a person, describe me, and depends on the describer. Is he going to say bad things of me or good things of me? How is the drawer going to draw my portrait? Is it going to draw me as an ugly person or as a handsome person? Is it going to describe me as close as I am? Testing is, you know, telling the student whether, you know, he is doing well on this or she is doing well on that, and so on. So, you know, and also, you know, testing is associated with pass and fail. And people just don't like that, you know. Students don't like to, you know, they would like always to see themselves go forward. And, you know, tests tend to tell them who they are.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. Arum?
Okay. I was a student, and we were all students too, right? I think we still remember how it felt to be a student. We hate tests. I personally test, but then that doesn't mean that they couldn't do the test, but they have to sometimes if they want to be admitted to be international students. And the thing is, students, we need to educate students. What's the purpose of taking the test? And also, we are teachers, we know what's the positive washback of a test. If you probably remember that term, what is taught is what is tested. It's supposed to be like that. Actually, I want to give you one example. When ETS created integrated skills, some teachers got confused with that. What is it? Like, why do you combine speaking in a writing test? And actually, when we look back in our classroom, that's what's going on in our classroom. We are teaching and student writing, taking notes of what we are teaching, right? And that's actually, behind the stories why ETS created integrated skills. And that's the students know nothing about it, and probably they haven't thought about, oh, that's what's going on? That's why you do the integrated skills? And yeah, that's the reason why I personally like to educate students about what is behind the test. Thank you.
Thank you. Roisin?
Yes, hi. Yes, I agree with much of what's been said before. I agree with Joe that it's absolutely essential that testing is integrated with learning. It's rather than just being a bolt-on. It's a little bit, if I think about the plenary this morning, about comments about observing teachers in the classroom and how teachers can be fearful, they can feel judged if they don't see this as a natural part of their own development, if they're not engaged with the process. And I do think that in order to achieve engagement, we need to motivate and make sure that the testing is relevant to the learners. And we know that motivation is the single most important element in good language acquisition.